Thank you very much. Let me begin by saying how impressed I was by the presentations this morning. They were really spectacular. Dr. Perry and I were kind of chatting at the coffee break, and I think we both share the view that, had those presentations been made at professional gatherings, they would have raised probably the level of discourse. And so I really want to compliment all of you and thank in particular Masako for making this event possible for the 19th time. It's my great honor and pleasure to introduce our very special guest for this morning session of the Critical Issues Forum, Dr. William Perry and Ms. Robin Perry. I've had the privilege to introduce Dr. Perry on a number of occasions, but this is the first time I've had both father and daughter on the same podium. Dr. Perry's name has become synonymous with government service, integrity, and common sense, traits he displayed repeatedly in his long career in government, beginning as an enlisted man in the Army Corps of Engineers and continuing through his tenure as the 19th Secretary of Defense from February 1994 to January 1997. As Secretary of Defense, he played a vital, indeed visionary role in championing the implementation and strengthening of the Non-Lugar Cooperative Threat Reduction Program. Subsequently, Dr. Perry continued his role as a visionary by joining with Sam Nunn, George Shultz, and Henry Kissinger to promote both the vision of a world without nuclear weapons and practical steps toward its achievement. It's hard to calculate the impact of this initiative, but I believe it's fair to say that it has dramatically altered the international debate on nuclear disarmament and has created a space for a serious political discussion in the United States and throughout the world, which did not exist previously. Each decade, Dr. Perry finds another way in which to make a major contribution to nuclear security. And one of his most recent initiatives focuses on my own favorite theme of education of young people, the hope and promise of tomorrow. This theme resonates throughout his marvelous new autobiography, My Journey at the Nuclear Brink. Dr. Perry's extraordinary record of achievements in government, business, and academia are so well known that it's hard to say something novel by way of introduction. Therefore, I thought I would conclude my introductory remarks by noting one of his lesser-known feats that I culled from an old DoD, Department of Defense, news brief that he gave in February 1996. In it, he notes that in the course of his travels to over 40 countries the previous year, he had a number of remarkable culinary and cultural encounters that helped shape his character. They included a sample of such local Asian delicacies as the ear of a pig, rendered Manchurian toad fat, and on one particularly memorable evening in Tashkent, a combination of shashlik and fermented mare's milk served while listening to an Uzbek colonel impersonate Frank Sinatra. I would have thought this was an apocryphal event, but I subsequently heard the same colonel croon at a dinner held in Tashkent on the occasion of the first conference devoted to the Central Asian Nuclear Weapons-Free Zone. This story has nothing to do with the topic of Secretary Perry's remarks today, but perhaps it gives you a sense that in addition to being a giant among men in the field of international security, Bill Perry also has an adventurous palate and an ear for good music. Bill, it's a pleasure to welcome you and Robin back to Monterey. We look forward to your remarks about your journey at the nuclear brink. We'll then have a discussion with you and your daughter with questions from our high school audience. So please join me on the podium.
I would like to start off by thanking Bill Potter and the James Martin Center for sponsoring this wonderful and unique conference. I have believed for many years now that the only way we're going to deal with this nuclear problem is through education. And the education has to start young, particularly has to start at high school. And Bill Potter has been a pioneer in recognizing this, and he has the best and the most successful program underway in the country for actually implementing it. So Bill, congratulations, and thank you for that wonderful work. I have to tell you also how impressed I was by the talks that I heard this morning. And I want to thank all of the students that gave the talk and all of the other high school students who were here and preparing for this same, preparing to get this important education about this existential threat to you and to your families and to the whole world. But I would be remiss if I did not also recognize and thank the teachers and the principals with whom you worked and who helped you prepare for these events. Anything that we can do to encourage the teachers and the principals to move forward on this is critically important. I do not believe we will really deal effectively with the nuclear problem until the youth of our country become fully understanding about how dangerous this is to their future and start to work actively to reduce this danger, ultimately to eliminate it. Now, I was about your age. I was just 17 when the bomb was dropped on Hiroshima. A few months later, I turned 18. I joined the US Army and was assigned to the Army of Occupation in Japan. Nothing that I'd ever lived through prepared me for the utter devastation I saw when I reached Tokyo. All of the wooden buildings had been destroyed. Concrete buildings were badly damaged, and the people were living in utter devastation. The damage in Tokyo was comparable to the damage you've heard about today and earlier at Hiroshima. But there was one very, very important difference. The destruction in Tokyo took several years to accomplish, with thousands of bombers and tens of thousands of bombs. Hiroshima occurred in one instant. One airplane, one bomb. Einstein, at about that time, said that the development of the nuclear bomb has changed everything. Everything except the way we think. But I must say, even at the age of 18, that experience began to change my way of thinking. I'm going to talk today about that and other experiences in my life did change my way of thinking and lead me to where I am today, where I'm advocating the total elimination of nuclear weapons, which is a pretty big step forward for a former Secretary of Defense who was responsible for the development and the production and the deployment of those weapons. The next milestone of my journey occurred in 1962. At the time, I was a director of a scientific laboratory, not a government laboratory, but I was part of industry. But I was a scientific consultant to the Department of Defense and to the Central Intelligence Agency. And I got a telephone call one day from the Deputy Director of CIA, who asked me to come back to Washington to consult with him on what he called an important technical problem. I said, sure, I'll rearrange my schedule to fly back next Monday to see you. He said, you don't understand. I need to see you right away. So I got on the night flight and flew back. And the next morning, I went into his office, and I was stunned when he showed me pictures of a missile deployment underway in Cuba. And that was my first inkling of what came to be called the Cuban Missile Crisis. The next 8 days, I worked on a small team that I think was 7 or 8 of us. All day, all night, and by midnight or 2 a.m., we had prepared a report. What had happened that day, the intelligence evaluation of what had happened, based on pictures of airplanes flying over Cuba, based on intercepts, based on everything available. And that report was on President Kennedy's desk first thing in the morning. There's his basis for evaluating what his actions are going to be that day. Every day that I went into that analysis center, I truly believed would be my last day on Earth. And to this day, I believe we avoided a nuclear catastrophe as much by good luck as by good management. The third milestone of my life occurred in 1978. I was in government at this time. I was the Undersecretary of Defense for Research and Engineering. And I was awoken by a telephone call at 3 o'clock in the morning. The general on the other end of the line got right to the point. He was the watch officer, by the way, at the North American Air Defense Command. And he told me that his computers were showing 200 ICBMs on the way from the Soviet Union to the United States. And for one heart-stopping moment, I believed we were about to experience the catastrophe that we had avoided during the Cuban Missile Crisis. The general quickly put my mind to rest. He said he had concluded that this was a false alarm. Why was he calling me? I was in charge of research and engineering. He was calling me because he knew that something had gone wrong with his computers, but he didn't know what. And he wanted to have he also knew he had to brief the president the next morning, who would want to know what had happened and what could he do to prevent it from happening again. I have to tell you that in that phone call, I was not able to diagnose the problem. It took us 3 days to finally figure out what had happened. The sergeant who had come on duty that night had put a tape into the computer, but instead of the operating tape, he put in a training tape. And the training tape went through a very realistic scenario of an attack. It was human error. We had amazingly capable equipment. We had foolproof procedures. But nothing is foolproof to human error. We have had 3 such false alarms that I'm aware of. There are at least 2 or 3 that I know of in the former Soviet Union and 1 in Russia. Happily, we have survived all of them, but we have survived, again, as much by good luck as by good management. Why do I say good luck? Suppose the event which I experienced had occurred not at a time when nothing was going on in the world, but it occurred during the Cuban Missile Crisis, or during the Mideast crisis, which had happened just earlier, when we were on alert, fully expecting a war to start. What if it had happened then? I have no doubt we would actually have launched our missiles and would accidentally have brought the world to disaster. The 4th milestone of my life occurred when I was the Secretary of Defense. The Soviet Union by then had dissolved. The nuclear weapons that had been in the Soviet Union had been deployed in 4 different republics. Russia, of course, had the majority of them, but there were 3 other republics that had them. When the Soviet Union dissolved, the weapons that were in those other 3 republics, Ukraine, Kazakhstan, and Belarus, stayed with those new republics. So we had instantly 3 new nuclear nations who had no real experience or background in how to maintain and operate and protect those weapons. Each of those countries at the time was going through substantial social, economic, and political problems, I would say close to chaos. And there were these thousands of nuclear weapons under their control. In the United States, we called that the loose nukes problem. And we're very concerned that that would precipitate a nuclear catastrophe. At the time, 2 enlightened senators did something which is a blessing for the whole world. They created something called the Nunn-Lugar program, Senator Sam Nunn and Senator Dick Lugar, the purpose of which was to use resources of the United States under the direction actually of the Secretary of Defense to help those 3 nations bring those weapons under, to dismantle them and safely get rid of the fissile material. That was the non-recored program. That was dealing with a problem we had never envisioned, and we had to improvise how to deal with that problem. When Senator Nunn and Senator Lugar went to visit Russia and Ukraine as part of their research before they actually wrote the legislation, they invited two civilians to come along with them, two experts in the subject. One was myself, and the other was a young scientist named Ashton Carter, who, by the way, is today the Secretary of Defense of the United States. So we were there as their advisors, and we came back on the plane on the way back. We all agreed the problem was even more dangerous than we thought, and we cooked up the concept of what came to be called the non-recored program. So I played a small role in helping to create that program. I never imagined what happened a year later, which I became responsible for implementing when I became Secretary of Defense. I brought on board my Assistant Secretary of Defense, Ash Carter, and gave him the specific responsibility of making the non-recored program happen. When I was the Secretary of Defense, my top priority, a very unusual priority for Secretary of Defense, was dismantling 8,000 nuclear weapons. 4,000 in the former Soviet Union and 4,000 in the United States. And I think that was my proudest achievement as a Secretary of Defense. No other Secretary of Defense would even want to make a claim like that. So, when I left office, I believed, I should back up a little bit now and say that during that process of dismantlement, I not only had to work closely with the governments of Ukraine, Kazakhstan, and Belarus, got their complete support and cooperation, I had to work closely with the government of Russia. We were using them not only to help us during the dismantlement, but to actually take the fissile material from the bombs and blend it down into low-enriched uraniums that could be used in peaceful nuclear reactors. They did that, transferred the low-enriched uranium to the United States, where it is used even today to run our nuclear reactors, which provide electricity, which provide the lights in this room. In fact, 50% of the electricity that's produced in the United States from nuclear reactors, 50% comes from the fuel that used to be in bombs that were directed against the United States. The fifth milestone I want to tell you about occurred in 2007 when I met with my colleagues, Sam Nunn, George Shultz, and Henry Kissinger. We looked back at the great moments when we were dismantling nuclear weapons in the mid-90s. Observed that that had stopped. I thought really at that time that we were well on our way to eliminating the deadly nuclear legacy of the Cold War, but that was not to be. We not only stopped that work, we started reverting, we started retrogressing. And so Shultz and Kissinger and Nunn and I believe we ought to call attention to the world that we're not dealing adequately with this dangerous problem. We wrote the first op-ed in the Wall Street Journal, followed by 3 others, calling attention to the world of the danger of nuclear weapons, not during the Cold War, but today. Arguing that ultimately we had to eliminate those weapons, and in the meantime we had to take very specific and concrete steps to reduce the danger they posed to our civilization. Those were, for a few moments, a few glorious years as people responded to that call. The highlight, without a doubt, occurred in February of 2007, when Barack Obama, just having been, probably 2009, when Barack Obama, just having been inaugurated as president, went to Prague and made his famous speech, where he said, "I speak clearly and with conviction the commitment of the United States to seek the peace and security of a world without nuclear weapons." That, for me, was actually the high point of my life when I heard that speech. And I believed we were on the way. But again, that was not to be. For a few years we made progress, and again we have begun retrogressing. Those golden days could not be sustained. Today, as you've heard in the briefings, we have over 15,000 nuclear weapons, and in the process of building a whole new generation of nuclear weapon systems. We are reliving the Cold War nuclear arms race. Why is this happening? I think fundamentally because our public, your publics, are blissfully unaware of the dangers that we face, blissfully unaware of them. And so it's quite clear that the first step in dealing with this problem has to be education. That's why conferences like this are so important, because the education has to start with the young people. It has to start here. I have decided at that time to dedicate the rest of my life to dealing with this deadly nuclear legacy of the Cold War. My first effort on that was to write a book on my journey at the nuclear brink, in which I told of my experiences, some of which I've related to you today, how those experiences shaped my thinking, in the hopes that if people read this book, they might be able to vicariously experience that and begin to think about how dangerous nuclear weapons were to them and to their families. So that was my first effort, but I recognized even at the time that was inadequate. A book gets through to a relatively, if I'm lucky, a few tens of thousands of really elite readers. Very few of them will be young. I had to find a way to get a mass audience for this book. And so we decided to take the project we'd used to write the book, which is under the direction of my daughter Robin, whom you'll hear from in a moment. She was the editor of my book. We decided to take that talent and dedicate to a different project, which was education, in particular education directed towards the young. That's why I'm so pleased and so thrilled with this conference, which I think is the icon of the work that's being done in this field. Robin will be talking to you in just a moment about what we're doing in that project, Educate the Young. And she will also show you a video, what I think describes the primary danger to us today, which is the danger of nuclear terrorism. I'm about to end my talk and introduce Robin, but I understand, and I apologize for that, this has been a somewhat gloomy talk. And so I want to end with a somewhat more optimistic or upbeat note. During the Cold War, there was a famous scientist in the Soviet Union named Andrei Sakharov. He was the primary developer of the Russian hydrogen bomb, actually. But after he retired from bomb building, he set on a project. His project was political reform in the Soviet Union. Now, can you imagine, this was during the 80s, can you imagine a more daunting and hopeless task? One person, one man, seeking out to try to achieve political reform in the Soviet Union. And his colleagues, his scientific colleagues in particular, scoffed at him for doing that, said it's just totally idealistic. You have no chance of succeeding. And he wrote a letter to one of them answering them. And I'll quote you from the letter. He said, "There is a need to create ideals, even when you cannot see any route to achieve them. Because if there are no ideals, then there can be no hope. Then there can be no hope." I've been asked why, at my age, I'm a little older than some of you in the room here, why I continue to pursue this hopeless task instead of settling down to enjoy my golden years in retirement. And to them I reply, quoting American poet Robert Frost, "The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep." Thank you. Robin Perry, who is the director of our project and was the editor of my book, and is a lovely person. I'll go with that.
Yeah, he's not very objective about that, but he's objective about a lot of other things and has a lot to say on these issues. And I have to say, I'm inspired every day working with him. He was a very fine father, but I've come into this job just a few years to help him on the book and work on this project, and I've learned a lot more about the man who is my father and the man who is doing these amazing things for the world. So it's an inspiration, and I'm glad you've had a chance to hear from him personally today. And we want to thank you for having us here, because we've been in turn incredibly inspired by what we have just heard from you. And it just gives us a great deal of confidence about the future to know that people as young as you are engaged in this issue and are understanding it at a level that is far beyond what an average person in the public knows anything about this. So it's helpful for us to hear from you and inspiring as well. And I hope you have a chance to read his book at some point. But as I want to tell you just a little bit about the genesis of the Perry Project. As my father said, it all started with his book. It just began with a memoir, and then our realization that if we really had a goal to reach a younger generation with this message, that the book was not going to do that. And we hope that as many people as possible, of course, read it and be influenced by it. But we felt that we really needed to take another route to reach younger people. And so, I mean, many people may read the book, but we wanted to focus more on millennials. And people have asked us, well, why millennials? You know, all the marketing is being directed at millennials now. We know why they want millennials to buy things, because they want to make a lot of money. But for this project, we sort of feel like there's so little awareness, mainly because most of you didn't grow up with the direct threat of nuclear annihilation like those of us in my generation, where the Cold War was in full swing and we were doing our duck and cover drills just to teach us how to save ourselves from nuclear weapons, as if there were a way to save ourselves. We didn't understand that there wasn't. We were too young. But you will also bear the cost and the risk of the nuclear policy that's being decided today, right now, as legislators are passing budgets that call for $1 trillion to rebuild the nuclear arsenal. And to have any kind of real voice or influence in the issues as these policy issues are decided, you really have to understand a great deal about it. And it's complex, as you've all, this elite group here has certainly understood that it is not simple material. You do have to study and learn and get a grasp on the real detail. But our issue was how to engage you in this issue. And clearly some of you have come to this issue on your own or with really influential teachers to have guided you to want to learn more and to know more, and programs like this one here that brings you together to talk to each other and be together. But what our project didn't know this. We convened our own group of students a little while back and asked them, how do we engage this younger audience in this issue? And we asked them to consider the question, why isn't this issue of nuclear danger on the radar of more of you? And what they brought back to us after a summer of working and researching is that there is plenty of information out there. It's all over the internet, but it's just not reaching your age group. They pretty much told us things you already knew, of course, which is that millennials access and consume information very differently than my generation. You all got your phones, it's mobile-centric, it's on small screens, it's preference for video, short-form, high-impact storytelling, which we saw some of that in the presentations you did here today. Very creative approach to conveying information, on-the-go viewing anytime, anywhere. You can be standing online somewhere and getting a piece of content on your phone as you're waiting for something else to happen. You like to share what you learn through social networks. You like to create a sense of community by sharing what you know and creating your own content and participating in the process. You take action with what you learn, and you engage with the content in many small ways and in some cases bigger ways. And you get your news from a variety of sources, not the traditional New York Times or the big papers anymore. It's all over the internet, and you can consume it. So that's what led us to beginning to work with online education processes. And we also engaged a group of younger, they were just out of school, but young professionals to create some of the content, learning content for us that would have a younger sensibility, engaging them in the process of creating what is it that might pull people into this issue and help them understand what the danger is. So in the process of doing that, it was really interesting because many of them really didn't know that much about the issue themselves, but they were really intrigued with the idea of working with us to create the content. And they brought their skills to the process. And we acted only as advisors. We didn't, and we gave them feedback, and we pointed them in the direction of experts when they had questions or needed information. And we requested only that they create content in a variety of media and not just stick to one. And some of those results are posted on the homepage of the Perry Project's website, which is www.wjperryproject.org. You may or may not have had a chance to take a look at that, but if you have a minute, you could sample some of the content right there. We're constantly adding new things that happen when Dr. Perry is speaking places or writing articles. We try to get those up as quickly as possible. But we just wanted to, I'll end this with just sharing one example that our students created. If you've had a chance to look at the book, there's a scenario, nuclear nightmare scenario that opens the book in the preface. It's pretty grim, and we're sorry that it's grim, but you all know how grim this issue is. That's not news to you. But it's intended really to start a public conversation that we really desperately need to have, and we hope that this can help begin that conversation and that dialogue that some of your groups talked about the importance of having dialogue. Well, something like this is a dialogue opener as far as engaging other people in this issue. You are all ambassadors to take this issue out to a bigger public, and we hope you will use all tools available to do so. So Masako was going to help us show the video.
Buried deep under these bone-dry high plains, in a covert section of a massively hardened centrifuge facility, a team is hard at work. They are members of a breakaway faction of the country's security forces, and they are busy enriching 40 kilograms of uranium. By July 3rd, they achieve their target of 90% enrichment, and then transfer the uranium to a nearby secret lab, where another team of technicians assembles it into a crude nuclear bomb. On August 31, they finish their work. They put the bomb in a packing crate labeled agricultural equipment and transport it to a nearby airfield where it is stored in a warehouse. 2 weeks later, it is removed and loaded onto an aircraft with civilian air cargo luggage. It flies to Dubai, where the crate is transferred, along with other goods and equipment, to a global air transport freighter. Destination, Washington, D.C. The plane lands at Washington's Dulles International Airport at 2:47 a.m. on September the 15th. By late afternoon, the crate is delivered to a warehouse in the southeast part of the district. Then, before daybreak, on September the 17th, the bomb is removed from the crate and loaded onto a delivery truck. Several hours later, an American citizen eases the truck out into traffic. She drives it to a location on Pennsylvania Avenue, midway between the White House and the Capitol building. At 11:09 a.m., she stops in the middle of traffic, climbs down onto the street, and triggers the detonator. The bomb explodes with a power of 15 kilotons. There are more than 80,000 instant deaths, including the President, the Vice President, the Speaker of the House, and the 320 members of Congress present when the bomb goes off. There are also more than 100,000 seriously wounded, and virtually no place to treat them. Telecommunication facilities throughout the greater Washington area have gone down. Soon, cable news is broadcasting scenes of vast devastation from the Capitol. A short time later, all major news outlets report receiving an identical message. The message claims that 5 more bombs are hidden in 5 different cities across the country. It says one of these bombs will be set off each week for the next 5 weeks, unless all American troops based overseas are ordered to return immediately to the U.S. homeland. The nation is hurled into panic. Everything begins shutting down. Within a half hour, the stock market drops more than 70% before trading is halted. From coast to coast, masses of people begin to stream out of cities, no matter their size or location. There is widespread gridlock. Cell phone systems are soon overwhelmed, and calls cannot go through. Internet access is impossible in many regions, and the nation is now in a constitutional crisis. By succession, the Senate President pro tem is now the country's president. But he is being treated for pancreatic cancer far from the Capitol at the Mayo Clinic. The Secretary of Defense and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, both of whom were testifying to the House Armed Services Committee on their recent budget request, are dead as well. Martial law is declared in Washington and surrounding regions, and the next day, the entire country. There is widespread looting and violence in many cities. Federal and National Guard troops are mustered. Soon there are reports of troops firing on crowds. There are increasing numbers of reports of rioting against immigrants and foreigners. Within days, the military begins to construct large detention centers around the country.
was to open the floor immediately to questions from the audience, although I have a number of questions that were submitted in advance, but I feel compelled after that exceptionally powerful and really gloomy film, Dr. Perry, to ask you, as a first step, how do you see us at least moving in the direction to avoid this nightmarish scenario that you have so ably and frighteningly depicted?
We talked today, and some of your speakers today talked about political activism that could be achieved. My own view is that political activism today on the most important problems will not be successful. I think what is required, first of all, is an intensive program of public education. Education is the key to success here. That's why we have devoted our efforts not to lobby in Congress, which I believe will not be effective, but to trying to educate and to focus our education primarily on young people, beginning with high school and college, but not limited to that. I am trying some steps of political activism. For example, writing papers and speaking with public officials about ways of at least reducing the size of the nuclear modernization program, which is underway in the United States today. I do not have high expectations I will be successful in that. I'm trying anyway. But while we can be successful in his education, understanding that does not have immediate gratification. It takes a long time for it to take effect. But that time is measured for when it begins and when it begins effectively.
Thank you, Bill. There are a number of excellent questions that I have compiled, but I think that we would benefit most from a kind of an interactive discussion here. So let me first invite any of you who have questions, either for Dr. Perry or for Robin, to ask your question. I know you may be somewhat intimidated by having a former Secretary of Defense, someone like Dr. Perry, before you, but I think he would welcome questions from American, Russian, or Japanese students. So I would encourage you to do that. Maybe while you're lining up, let me start here with one of the questions that was submitted earlier that Masako has provided to me. But please do take advantage. It's really a unique opportunity for you to ask questions directly to Dr. Perry. So if you'd like, I encourage all of you to line up. So one, I think, important question that was submitted here, Bill, is what do you believe that we as students can do to help achieve the goal of a world free of nuclear weapons? And there's a follow-on question here. What can young people do to influence policymakers to benefit the cause of non-proliferation and disarmament?
The first thing you can do is inform yourself. This program is a wonderful way of doing that. The James Martin Center has many important courses in the schools that are dedicated to this problem. There are a number of websites you can turn to for information. One of them is our own website, the wjperryproject.org website, which you can but there are many other websites. The Plowshares, for example, has a website. The Institute has a website. Go to those.
ATI, too, we don't want to forget.
But
the Nuclear Threat Initiative.
And in fact, our sponsors of our project here, the Nuclear Threat Initiative, and they have those websites, the Plowshare and NTI, so they're much more comprehensive than ours. So go to those websites and get informed of the problem. Then when you get informed, sit down, have little meetings with students, fellow students, family members. Bring up and for example, take this video we have here, which you can get right off our website. Play it, 6 minutes, you play it, and then use that to stimulate a discussion. How real is nuclear terrorism? What can we do as citizens to try to lower that danger? So after you do your own education, you start to help facilitate the education of others. Talk to your teachers and your principals, or bring courses in your school. So
I admit that's not as gratifying as writing a letter to your congressman and asking them to do something to change the world. But it's an important, I think it's a prerequisite to having any real success in the problem.
Thank you, Bill. Okay, I think now we've stimulated some audience questions here. Why don't we take two at a time here, because we do have quite a few, we actually have a growing number of questions. Maybe we'll take three at a time, and we'll start on my right here. If you'd like, and maybe if you could introduce yourself too, so Dr. Perry knows who is asking the question.
Hi, Dr. Perry. We met previously, but my name is Mira, and I'm a student at Catalina. My question is, you've obviously seen a lot, and you've been through a lot of what some people might call trauma, you know, going through war and seeing all the decisions being made to affect other people. What keeps you grounded and because the decisions that you make are very difficult, so what kind of keeps you grounded and focused on your goal?
What was the last question again?
What keeps you grounded and focused on your final goal?
Bill, would you prefer to respond directly, or would you like me to collect some questions?
Why don't you repeat it to make sure everybody gets it, sum it up.
Okay, I mean, I think the last point is that you have experienced many very difficult situations. You have observed war, you've seen preparations for war, and the punchline then was, what keeps you grounded?
It's a wonderful question.
First of all, I was heavily influenced by experiences I've had in my life, of which I've summarized 5 of them for you today. And those 5 are discussed in much more detail in my book. So those experiences are basic. Secondly, and I don't know how to really define this any better, is when I was growing up, I learned values, not necessarily religious values, but ethical values. Let me give you one example from that. I was in grade school during the Great Depression in the United States. That's way before your time. You may not know anything about it. It was a terrible time. There were 20, 30 million people unemployed, no jobs at all, no homes, just out on the road. They were called hobos. They had no home, no food. And I would come home from school for lunch. Now, we were not a well-to-do family at all. In fact, I was pretty close to being a poor family. But my mother would serve myself and my brother and sister our lunch. And a couple times a week there'd be a knock at our back door, and there'd be a hobo there who wants something to eat. He had no way of, this would be his only way to get something to eat that day. And my mother would always take a plate, scrape a little bit off my plate, a little bit off my sister's plate, a little off my brother's plate, and give it to the man at the back. And that was, to me, an important lesson. First of all, that however well off I might be, there were many other people in the world who were really suffering. And secondly, it was my mother's belief that their suffering was her suffering, we should do something to help alleviate it. Finally, I might say that what, if anything keeps me grounded, is my family. You've met my daughter here. I have, she has a sister and 3 brothers, and I have a wife with whom I've been married for 68 years, which is pretty unusual these days. And my concern for their welfare, the welfare of their children, my grandchildren, and 2 great-grandchildren, keeps me grounded. Thank you for that wonderful question.
Why don't we turn to the next questioner here. If you could introduce yourself and then ask the question, Dr. Perry.
Hello, Dr. Perry. Thanks for coming and talking with us. My name is Shunji, and I'm from Tokyo, Soka Senior High School. In this conference, many of us concluded that education is the way for disarmament. I think the CIF is a great example of interaction of education and disarmament. Do you have any examples or ideas of interaction between disarmament and education?
So So the individual mentioned the value of gatherings such as this sort, and I think wanted to know if you could be any more specific about the linkage between education and disarmament. Although I think that Dr. Perry addressed this over a longer time frame, but if you wanted to add anything more to what you had said earlier, Bill, I'll give you a chance.
I'm sorry to say there are very few examples like the one you're seeing here today. Without doubt, Bill Potter and this Senate have been a real pioneer in this field, but I hope that as they will serve as an example to others and we'll start to see this spread out. Beyond what centers like this can do, teachers, principals on their own can go forward and introduce courses, introduce discussion groups and seminars. And students will flock to those sort of things, and it will spread. As students, you can get your own family influence, you can get your friends' influence. It has to be a grassroots movement, I think. There's no great push from the government on down to make this happen. It has to be from the people on up.
If I could also add, although the question wasn't really directed to me, I found over my many years of teaching that the most effective mode of promoting an understanding of the issues that we're talking about today is through the use of simulations, where students play the roles of different decision makers, because it has the effect of opening your mind, seeing with the eyes of others. And so, to the extent, as a number of you indicated yesterday and today, the importance of better understanding another country's perspective, I think by engaging in these simulation role-playing exercises, I think you much better understand the perspectives of other parties. And I found many of my own students move from my simulation class one semester to participating in international negotiations in the so-called real world the next. And so this is something we may want to do more of in future critical issue forums as well.
Let me add one other thing to that. The stimulation point that Bill makes is very important. I teach a course at Stanford on the subject we talked about in my talk, and more than that, but focusing on the dangers of nuclear weapons. And I think this does a good job of getting the points across the student, but I have a few hundred students in my course, and there are millions out there that need educated. So we're not going to get across this message across by individual classes. That's not going to do it. I'm in the process right now of converting that class into what is called a MOOC, Massive Open Online Course. That should be done later this year, and then that will be on the internet. It'll be available for free to anybody that wants to take it. And now you have the opportunity of getting messages and things like that across not to hundreds of students, but to hundreds of thousands or even millions of students.
Thank you, Bill. Please, if you'd introduce yourself and ask your question.
Hi, thank you for coming, Dr. Perry. My name is Agnes. I'm from Santa Catalina, and I was wondering if you would your experience in as the Secretary of Defense. Do you think that affected the fact that you are so passionate about non-proliferation, or do you think you would still be passionate about non-proliferation had you not been Secretary of Defense?
I was passionate about it before that. My experience as Secretary gave me the opportunity to act on my passion, something none of you have today, and to the same extent, something I don't have today, really, to the same extent. But I happened to be Secretary of Defense at the time the non-nuclear program had been passed. We had all these thousands of nuclear weapons out there, so I had an opportunity to act on it. And so my short answer to your question is that being Secretary didn't create the passion in me, but having that passion, it made me decide to make that task, dismantling nuclear weapons, as my first priority, and put all the energy I had into it. In 3 years, we dismantled 8,000 nuclear weapons involving 4 different countries. That was no small political achievement, I can tell you.
Robert, too, if at any point you want to respond. I found right.
Secretary of Defense has a lot of responsibility and thrown at him or her, well beyond one human capacity to deal with everything. So when it comes through to me and reading the book and working with him on this is the role that his priorities took in shaping what he accomplished. So he chose to put major priority on dismantling those nuclear weapons. There were many other things that could have gotten in the way of accomplishing that, except that he said, this is a big priority. These other things over here will either have to wait or they'll just be second and third on the list. And that is a lesson for everybody. It's like choosing how to use what you learn and how to put it to, how to make the most of the things that are important to you and not let so many other issues and the noise of life get in your way and keep you from accomplishing things you care about.
Thanks, Dylan.
Yeah, so we spoke earlier. My name's Dylan and I go to school back east at Choate Rosemary Hall. And I'm just wondering, in talking about all of these issues, you know, if you were president today or in a massive position of power, what would your immediate priorities be, and what do you think are the most effective ways of actually changing things? Because we haven't seen a lot of progress recently. How can we actually make things happen from that level?
President Perry.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you the two things I'm advising the president. I think probably not successfully, but I'm trying anyway. First of all, don't make things worse. Rebuilding the Cold War nuclear arsenal was a huge mistake, I think, both in Russia and the United States. We can, in the United States, our president can not really much affect Russian policy, but we can set an example, we can lead. One of the talks earlier today suggested leading, and that's in the United States could lead. We should do that. In fact, your talk, I think, Dylan did that. So we can lead by example. Certainly negative examples lead also, we should try to avoid those. But the negative example would be actually rebuilding all these nuclear. We tell to the world how important nuclear weapons are, how on one side of the face and on the other side of the face we tell them you should not have nuclear weapons. It doesn't compute.
That's a pretty good start.
Yeah. The positive thing that should be done, I mean, that's refraining from doing something. The positive thing that should be done is taking an active, proactive role in trying to re-engage Russia in political dialogue, especially about nuclear weapons. The minimum action, which I think the president should take, which I've strongly recommended to him that he take, is propose with Russia a joint working group on how to keep fissile material and nuclear weapons out of the hands of terror groups. This is an issue which is clearly in the interest of both countries. That video you saw of a nuclear bomb going off in Washington, D.C. could just as well have been Moscow. So both countries have interest in dealing with that. And the one thing, if we don't agree on anything else, the one thing we should agree on is doing everything we can to try to keep fissile material out of the hands of terror groups. Beyond that, though, we should be actually seeking to stop this corrosive dialogue, this corrosive atmosphere that's being created by both countries, and work to try to create a positive dialogue. You have heard about false alarms and accidental wars. And I told you that the false alarm I observed, there would have been a very different outcome had there been a dangerous context. You know, had we had a cruise missile crisis or something. We are creating a dangerous context today in the corrosive dialogue between the United States and Russia. So that if a false alarm would occur today, it's more likely that it could lead to a catastrophic outcome. So we should have as a very top priority, and this is what I tell our president, and I would tell President Putin if I had an opportunity to, we should take every opportunity to try to get away from this negative and antagonistic dialogue and get back to dealing on a civil basis with each other.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Bill. Please introduce yourself and the question.
Hello, Dr. Perry. My name is Monica and I'm from Santa Catalina School. This question is to be directed to all adults before all of us. We are in the midst of an election, and who wins will be like a crucial part of American history and world history. So I was wondering what kids our age, I'm already 18 so I can vote, and I was wondering what should we look for in candidates to further take us to like a safer world instead of increasing our global nuclear vulnerability.
I must say what I'm looking for in a candidate I'm not finding in the rhetoric I'm hearing in our campaign so far. The most important thing I would look for is avoiding inflammatory rhetoric about using military force, using weapons, especially using nuclear weapons. Unfortunately, we're hearing a lot of that rhetoric today, which I think is very, very negative and counterproductive. The most positive thing I look for is a statement about being willing to reach out to countries all over the world, seeking accommodation and seeking agreements that nuclear weapons are a hazard to the world and they must never, ever be used again. I would like to hear all of our presidential candidates say nuclear weapons are a danger to the world and they must never, ever be used again.
Which gets back to previous questions, the theme that keeps coming up, what can we do? You know, where can we make a difference? One is to engage in the political process during this election year and find ways to get those questions asked at these different forums and debates. It's been a little scary to hear the level of dialogue about issues of national security so far. But hopefully as we get closer to the election, it will get more serious and less rhetoric and more content.
Thanks. Please.
Hi, my name is Eric and I'm from Pacific Grove High School. I was wondering, to those who wish to pursue careers in engineering, how can we impact the non-proliferation movement later on in the workforce?
Well, engineers are people too, and citizens too, and they have the same citizen responsibility that anybody else does. But in addition to that, they bring to the political debate an analytical mind. And my own degrees were not in engineering, they were mathematics, but my career has been in engineering. And I've always believed that the analytical thinking that I learned in mathematics was very useful to everything that I did in life, and in particular to considering such important issues as how to deal with, how to control nuclear weapons, how to avoid wars. Analytical thinking doesn't lead you to, you cannot solve those complex issues through equations, but analytical thinking helps you cast the problem in objective terms, and I think that's very important. One other thing I might say, I never intended when I went to college, when I got a PhD in mathematics, when I went to work in the engineering industry, I never ever intended to go into government. And I never would have dreamed I was going to be the Secretary of Defense. All of that happened without my planning, and I might say almost accidentally. But the engineering training I had, the mathematics training I had, when I did get into government, I found to be very, very useful.
Thank you.
Thanks. Please, welcome your question.
Hello, Mr. Perry. We appreciate your coming here. My name is Galina Salnikova. I'm from gymnasium number 164. And as an experienced politician, tell me please, what are the most effective strategies for negotiating such important issues as reducing nuclear stockpiles?
Yes, what, I mean, she,
Most important strategy.
yeah, how would you proceed if you were actually going to try to negotiate reductions in nuclear stockpiles?
Today, the first thing that must be done, I think, for real negotiations to take place is to improve the political atmosphere between the United States and Russia. It's so corrosive today that it's not an appropriate atmosphere for a good dialogue. So number one is work to create dialogue, and then to me the first step on that would be for President Obama and President Putin agree to meet to talk about nuclear issues. Even if they don't agree on anything else, they can talk about nuclear issues, and I have been so recommending to our president. So that's one very important thing that can be done. Beyond that, even without the dialogue, I do believe the United States can lead by example. Maybe the example won't be followed. Nothing lost if it isn't followed, but if it is followed, then we can set off a avalanche of positive developments. We have done that a few times successfully in history. Back after the Soviet Union dissolved, a few years there where President Bush actually unilaterally made major reductions in nuclear weapons, which were then followed by Russia. So that strategy has worked in the past. It's no guarantee it'll work in the future, but it's always worth trying, and no great loss if it's tried and it doesn't work.
Let me also just ask you, I don't think I mentioned this in my introductory remarks yesterday, but it's relevant to this dialogue between the United States and Russia in particular. As some of you, but probably most of you, are not aware, this fall we will launch a new dual degree in non-proliferation studies between Moscow State Institute of International Relations and Middlebury Institute of International Studies at Monterey. And this is something perhaps for those of you who are interested in the field to aspire to. Our students will spend the first semester in Moscow studying. They'll spend 2 semesters in Monterey. They'll then write an honors thesis from UMO and also intern at an international organization. So this is, again, a longer-term process, but I think it's consistent with what Dr. Perry has suggested, the need for us to work together to solve these crucial issues, and I think we've created a mechanism to promote that. And hopefully, in the future, a number of American and Russian students will participate in this, but this is a program that's open to all nationalities, and so we would welcome Japanese applicants as well. Let me turn to our colleague on the left here to introduce herself.
Dr. Perry, thank you so much for coming. My name is Catherine Lick. I'm a senior here at Santa Catalina. You mentioned that false alarms are scarier in bad context, and we are obviously in a negative atmosphere due to all of these terrorist organizations. How do we better prevent false alarms nowadays, and do you personally feel a stronger sense of safety and security having nuclear weapons in the United States arsenal?
The best action we can take to reduce the likelihood of nuclear terrorism is the action actually underway today through something called the Nuclear Summit meeting, where the 50 nations that possess fissile material are gathered in different capitals of the world to discuss better ways of controlling and protecting those materials. I think there's nothing we can do more effective than that. My only concern is that the summit seemed to have stopped with this last meeting, and I hope that we'll be able to continue that same effort and that same publicity to that problem. Because I think that's the best thing we can do to reduce the likelihood of nuclear terrorism. There's a second question, though.
Yes, do you feel personally more secure that the United States has nuclear weapons in its arsenal?
During the Cold War, I believed that nuclear weapons were critical for our security. Whether I was right or wrong, that's what I believed. Today, I believe that nuclear weapons pose more of a danger to our security than a help. Not many people share that feeling, but if more people share that feeling, we find ways of, I think, of getting rid of them.
Thank you very much.
I know that we're running over time, but this is such an extraordinary opportunity. I suggest that we take the questions from those who are in line, and then we'll continue with the program if I'm not overruled by Masako. Is that okay, Masako, if we do that?
We can show the lunch hour.
Okay, that's good. Please.
Hi, Dr. Perry. I'm Manan Shah. I go to the Harker School. I think we talked previously. So we've been hearing a lot about North Korea, its unstable regime, and its potential nuclear threat. and North Korea warned that it would make a preemptive and offensive nuclear strike in response to U.S.-South Korean military exercises that began this Monday. So my question is, how credible do you think North Korea's nuclear threats are, and do you believe there is any way for the international community to address these issues?
Bill can speak probably for a couple of hours on that topic, given his involvement with the DPRK, but I look forward to your short response, Bill.
Probably the two most dangerous places in the world today, two most dangerous countries in the world today, regarding nuclear weapons are North Korea and Pakistan. If I want to say where is the nuclear hazard likely to come from, what countries like to come from, I would say those two countries is the most probable. We missed the opportunity to control the North Korean nuclear weapon program. I spent a good many years of my life, obviously unsuccessfully, trying to achieve that goal. The danger is not only that they might use the nuclear weapons, as in fact they have threatened many times to do, but that they would transfer the technology or the weapons either to another country or to a non-state actor. They have already transferred part of that technology to Syria, who were caught in doing it, and that danger went away. But I think they already have worked closely with the AQCON network in Pakistan. So the danger of proliferation of technology and materials is very great.
Thank you.
You want to add to that?
No, as some of you know, we also just had a two-day conference focused on this issue with U.S. and Russian decision makers and experts, and I think what emerged was that this is an extraordinarily complex issue. There's I think a difference of views about how far diplomacy will take us, and the role that sanctions also play here. But after 2 days of a very high-level and informed discussion, we really didn't reach a consensus, and so I'm not going to try to provide a concise answer to the question. It's a very good one. I think it will require the most informed decision makers collectively to deal with this problem. I don't think it's a problem that's going to be solved by the United States alone.
Thank you.
Hello, Dr. Perry. My name is Damien, and I'm from Alliance Dr. Ogamohan High School in Los Angeles. And my question to you is also related to North Korea. So how do you think Kim Jong-un is different from his father, and how do you think that affects our goal to reduce nuclear stockpiles worldwide?
So he asked a question about the current North Korean leader and how different he is from his father, and how that difference may impact upon our ability to get North Korea to part with its nuclear weapons.
Let me pass that question to you, Bill, because you sat through that conference.
Right. Thanks a lot. I think in some respects, and here I'm actually drawing upon a point that I gleaned from your intervention at our conference last week, was that we can talk about the leadership and we can talk about the foreign ministries that are engaged in these deliberations, but lurking in the background is the military. And I think this is really the kind of the unknown issue. It may be possible for the heads of state to agree on an approach. It may even be possible to negotiate some accord among the foreign ministries. But as I learned from you the other day, Bill, the real question mark is what will the North Korean military tolerate? And so I think that's the big question mark, regardless of the leadership. Although I don't want to discount the importance of the leadership either. I don't know if you want to elaborate on that point. Okay. Thank you, please.
Hi, Dr. Perry. Thank you so much for coming to share your experiences with us. I'm Tiffany. We've just met, and I go to the Harker School in San Jose. And my question is, going on the topic of worldwide stockpiles, one major obstacle to worldwide disarmament is the fact that there are severe tensions between many countries. I'm thinking in particular of India and Pakistan and also Israel. What can the U.S. do to help overcome this obstacle of international tensions?
Well, it's the role that the United States can play in addressing some of these regional tensions. which have the potential, I think, underlying this to kind of escalate and could involve the use of nuclear weapons.
I don't think our diplomatic mission will make that much difference in those cases. I think the best thing we can do is lead by example, and we're not today.
One of the things you have talked about in previous talks that we've had is finding the common ground between these countries that are where the tensions are, such as in India and Pakistan, and trying to find mutually beneficial economic projects that give them more reasons to be together, cooperate, so that the likelihood of some kind of war getting out of hand or a conflict turning into war, that they're going to have many more reasons that they can't let that happen. Is what you call, instead of MAD, mutually assured destruction, MAED, mutually assured economic destruction.
Two countries believe their economy will be destroyed if they go to war. That is a deterrence, or a bigger deterrence, maybe even than nuclear weapons.
I also wanted to weigh in here because I was struck by a number of the comments over the course of the 2 days about the role of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. I think many of you kind of questioned its integrity and its impact. But I would say in response to the question that was just asked, particularly with respect to India, I think the one thing that we don't want to do is to engage in actions that diminish the value of being a non-nuclear weapons state party to the Non-Proliferation Treaty. And unfortunately, I would argue, I don't know if Dr. Perry would agree with this, but I think the decision by the United States in 2005 to dramatically revise its export control laws with respect to nuclear trade with India, and the exemption that was granted by the Nuclear Suppliers Group, specifically for India, a country that possesses nuclear weapons, in fact sends the signal to many other potential nuclear weapons aspirants that there are benefits to be gained by acquiring nuclear weapons. And so were the international community to admit India to the Nuclear Suppliers Group, I think that would send a most unfortunate message. And unfortunately, this is an area where the United States and Russia and Japan agree. I think they agree mistakenly, but it is an area where I think it would have damaging consequences in South Asia, among other places. Please.
My name is Nanako Nagaishi from Nagasaki, Japan. I would like to ask, what should young people do to keep telling the personal tragedies of nuclear weapon like Hibakusha story to the next generation?
First of all, get informed. Secondly, help educate other people about what you're informed on. Get informed of the dangers.
Thank you, please.
Hello, Dr. Perry. My name is Gabriel Kenneth Britt. I'm from Rock University High School in Janesville, Wisconsin. Before I ask my question, I just want to say that I am humbled by your presence here today. Your video had a very somber message concerning the prospect of nuclear and radiological terrorism. How can the United States, Russia, Japan, and the rest of the international community work together to prevent nuclear terrorism?
You'll let me give that question to you. That's your question.
Okay.
He's one of the greatest focus on that question.
Well, I think there are a number of things that have to be done. As Dr. Perry has noted, we have now recently witnessed the last of what will be apparently the very important nuclear security summits. And so it's a question of where do we go from here. I think there's an expectation that the International Atomic Energy Agency will assume significant responsibilities in the realm of combating nuclear terrorism. In fact, there's a very important ministerial meeting that will be held next December, where I think some of the activities that have been conducted over the past 16 years will continue. But I don't think there's really a substitute for a presidential led group of countries to focus on nuclear terrorism. And I think if there was one really significant accomplishment of the Nuclear Security Summit process, it's that an increasingly large number of countries recognize that it's not simply someone else's problem, it's their problem, that a nuclear terrorist incident anywhere has major ramifications everywhere. And so I think what we need to find is a mechanism, and I think there's some suggestions of this coming out of the last Nuclear Security Summit, that there has to be some kind of a contact group. The United States and Japan have subscribed to that. Hopefully, even though Russia didn't participate in the last Nuclear Security Summit, it will recognize that it's in its interest also to participate in this kind of a contact group, so that some of the important steps that were taken over the past 6 years in the summit process can be continued and strengthened. So again, I can give you a number of other very specific things that need to be done. One of my favorite topics, and then I'll turn the question, I'll give the mic back to the questioner, is to contemplate on the model of nuclear weapons-free zones, what some have called highly enriched uranium-free zones or highly enriched uranium-free communities. In fact, my center and the Nuclear Threat Initiative are now exploring how that approach might contribute both to non-proliferation, disarmament, and preventing nuclear terrorism. Please.
Hello, Dr. Perry. Thank you for saving the world. So our school really focused on dialogue, and I think it's really important to have dialogue because you both can have empowerment, but there are some countries that cannot do dialogue. For example, like ISIS, terrorists. So how can we dialogue with those countries? I was stuck in those problems while we are talking about dialogue. So if you have any ideas.
I'm not sure you would attribute the concept of a country to ISIS, but certainly these entities are very difficult in terms of engaging any kind of a dialogue. Dr. Perry, do you have any suggestions about how we do that?
There are only two ways I can think of to deal with ISIS, for example, are first of all keeping the materials out of their hand, which the nuclear summit was directed at. And secondly, military action against them. I'm very much in favor of the action which the United States and Russia and Britain and other countries are taking and trying to deal militarily to reduce the effectiveness of ISIS.
Please, if you'd like to introduce yourself and ask your question.
Hello, Dr. Perry. My name is Ryan. I'm from Punahou School in Honolulu. And my question was, you spoke on the importance of education and also the grassroots approach. But something that I was thinking about and struggling with was how small of a cross-section we here at CIF, and even if we go back and educate our entire school communities, how small of a cross-section that is. And if you had any suggestions on expanding the network further, especially to like other schools in our local areas, like what students can do for that.
So I think the thrust of the question was, this is really important what we're doing here, but it's just kind of the tip of the iceberg. How do we reach a broader segment of high school students? What would be some recommendations? I think you touched upon some of those in your presentation, as did Robin, but I'll give you an opportunity if you want to expand on how am I. Well, I think what I took away from your presentation and some of your remarks here is that, well, one can do this on a face-to-face basis, that we need to exploit these new technologies. We can use online tools to reach a much broader audience. And these can be of an interactive nature as well. And so I think particularly for those of us that are either in or near Silicon Valley, we need to exploit these new tools. Social media is, I think, an extremely effective means of communicating with a very, very, very wide audience. So while we may not be able to invite everybody in person all of the time to this kind of a gathering, I think we can connect in a virtual world to communicate this message. And I think those of you who are under 20 are probably much more adept at these creating these linkages and communicating than those of us who may be slightly older than 20.
I think that's the most important answer to the question, is the more extensive use of the internet. But beyond that, I think we can do something in the schools themselves so that you students are from a few select group of schools. What if every high school had programs like this? What if every high school had some group of their students taking programs like this? How do you get that to happen? And the only answer that I can think of to that is that the principals and the teachers have conferences. They meet, they talk. Try to spread the word yourselves as principals and teachers, and as students. You can also, you meet and talk with other students at other schools. So my short answer to that is grassroots activity. Try to get this spread to high schools all over the country and all over the world.
Thank you. I think this has been a tremendous panel. We want to thank Dr. Perry and Robin for their remarks, but I personally want to thank all of you. It's been really rewarding to have spent a Saturday morning with all of you who've come from so far, from Russia, from Japan, from other schools in the United States. I think you've made this a tremendous workshop. And again, I want to thank Masako for laboring very, very hard to pull this together. So please join me in thanking our speakers.
Thank you so much, Dr. Perry and Ms. Perry. And we have just a small token of appreciation on behalf of all the participants. So I was hoping the Bill to give.
Tell you that this is very, very meaningful. My final comment is you all don't know how lucky you are to have somebody like Bill Carter and somebody like this James Martin Center promoting this wonderful, wonderful program. This is unique in the world, and this is the man who's created it. Bill, thank you.
Thank you so much. So now we are going to have a closing remarks from Professor Mitsuru Kurosawa. He is also pioneering non-proliferation education in Japan and many different parts of the world. So I would like to ask him to give you the very short remarks. Sorry.
Ladies and gentlemen and high school students. So you are tired and you are waiting for the lunch, so I make it short, my final remarks. So it is my great pleasure and honor to be here and to meet high school students. And it is very important to education for high school students. And personally, I'm very happy and delighted to come back here. It is so-called my second hometown. I've been staying here for 6 months, 12 years ago, and I visited here almost 10 times. And I'm very content with William Potter and Masako Toki. And I have to make, general assessment of your speech and not a particular individual one. So I summarize your discussions and presentations. Generally speaking, your presentation and discussion are very, very good and high level compared to ordinary, how to say, this kind of event. So there are two parts of the, how to say, presentation. One is what is the current situation and the challenges. And second is the proposal and responses. And all presentation include these two big, nice elements. So the first one is, how do you say, current situation and dangerous situation. So maybe many refer to the Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And we learn much on the catastrophic humanitarian consequences. And second, there is, you refer the close calls. There is near misses. So as they said, we are lucky. So we stopped just before the, how do you say, nuclear nightmare. So it's only we are lucky. So it's still very risky work in nuclear area. So and there is a high possibility to use the nuclear weapons, and one is accidentally or unintentionally. So here trigger hard situation and also miscommunication, and there are many risky situations. That is accidental use. And also there is intentional use, nuclear deterrence. Someone referred to the nuclear deterrence. So it is intentional use. So deterrence based on the presumption that nuclear weapon can be and should be used. So it's a kind of danger. So we have to think about that also. And also new issue is the nuclear terrorism. So how to deal with that? There is no deterrence work for nuclear terrorists. And someone refers also to the, how you say, nuclear power generation accident on the Fukushima issues. So these are the, how you say, challenges we are facing now. And the responses you mentioned is that, so the reduction of nuclear weapons or de-alerting and stop the hair trigger deployment, or reduce a lot of the nuclear weapons in the military policies. And also takes a humanitarian approach to nuclear disarmament. So it is not the interest of each nation, it is the interest of humanity as a whole, that nuclear weapon will never be used again under any circumstances. So, and absolute guarantee is the abolition of nuclear weapons. And so someone says the change of the paradigm is necessary. And also many ask the comprehensive building measures and dialogue and international cooperation. And these are all concerned with education. So that this forum is very important to promote education on nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation. So, and I add some comments with this summary. And so I appreciate your presentation and your discussion. Even me, I learned much from your presentation. So I've been working for the nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation for over 40 years. Okay, so I put something in that. So in order to make a paradigm shift, we need, how to say, we have to change my thinking. So Paul always says, how to say, we know what to think, not only what to think, how to think, and also critical thinking. And in order to change the paradigm, we need to, evaluation of nuclear weapons. So currently, nuclear weapon is evaluated very high. So we have to make an effort to decrease the value of nuclear weapons in ordinary life. And so it's a kind of de-legitimize. So it is not legitimate to have nuclear weapons or something like that, or stigmatize nuclear weapons. So I sometimes talk about the smoking, tobacco and smoking. So smoking was beautiful when I was young. 30 and 40 years ago. Now smoking is lose their values, and it is estimated negative. So we have to work for nuclear weapon has a negative value, not positive value. And in order to do that, I recommend to think about the nuclear myth. So it is nuclear deterrence is good thing, is it a true or myth? And I recommend one book, and it is written 2 or 3 years ago by Ward Wilson. He was staying here for a while, and it is a 5 myths surrounding nuclear weapons. And the first is that nuclear weapons dropped in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. That makes Japan to surrender. But academic research and recent common understanding is that the reason why Japan surrendered is the Russian participation to the war. So it is historically and chronologically examined. So, and there are other and also the nuclear deterrence work, but not many cases it didn't work. So this has a book of this was Wilson, and I give a Japanese participant good news. This book, and I initiated, and coordinated the translation into Japanese. And Masako is translate one of the chapters. And it will come soon, late April or early May. So it's just 100 pages books, and it is myth. So we have to change our thinking, and we have to think critically, as what I always say. So I recommend this book. And I speak a little, one thing about the G8 Foreign Ministers meeting early this weeks. And I'm thinking about from the point of education. So the foreign ministers and State of Secretary Kerry visited the Hiroshima, and he went to the Peace Museum, and I read in the guest book message what Kerry wrote. And please think he was educated or not. Okay? Everyone in the world should see and feel the power of this memorial. It is a stark, harsh, compelling reminder not only our obligation to end the threat of nuclear weapons, but to dedicate all effort to avoid war itself. War must be the last resort, never the first choice. This memorial compels us all to redouble our effort to change the world, to find peace and build the future so yearned for by students everywhere. So I feel that he was educated a little and what see. But we are expecting more, what activities he would do that. And there is according to my opinion, high possibility. President Obama may come to Hiroshima in the next month. There is a G7 summit at the end of May in Iseshima. It is just between Tokyo and Hiroshima. And I hope Obama come to Hiroshima and make an address like a plaque. And I hope not only the address, and make a decision for act for nuclear disarmament unilaterally. So that is, we have a hope in this case. And I say the last remarks, and I have to conclude this session. And I highly appreciate the organizers of this forum, and William Potter, and also Masako Toki, and also three assistants, Daniel, Malvira, and Wilda. And also the Santa Catalina School and also the students. I appreciate these things and I declare the successful conclusion of this conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Kurosawa. So we have two more very important things we have to do before we head to aquarium. First, award ceremony. Of course, it's very important, and we have a very exciting. Are we strapped to book signing? It's okay. Okay. Thank you. So first, we are going to do award ceremony. So today, we have a very rare opportunity that Dr. Porter and Dr. Perry is also here. So maybe this might be good photo opportunity for students. So I am going to call schools in order of presentation. So if I call, please, schools and teachers and students, please come to front, okay? So first school is Santa Catalina High School.
Get Dr. Perry here as well. Who's accepting this on your behalf here, like I said. We can all, maybe we can move the mic. Masako, you want to be here?
High School from Nagasaki. So I think you know the order of the presentation, so why don't you line up to save time. Yeah, Kasei High School from Nagasaki. Congratulations.
Okay.
Okay, the next school is Gymnasia number 1624, Zelenogorsk, Russia. The next school is Rock University High School, Janesville, Wisconsin. Woo. Next, Soka Senior High School, Tokyo, Japan.
Thank you so much.
Next, Dr. Olga Mohan High School, Los Angeles, California. Next, Lyceum Lesnar, Russia. Congratulations. Next, Nagasaki Nanzan Senior High School, Nagasaki, Japan. Congratulations. Next, Pacific Grove High School, Pacific Grove, California. Next, Ritsumeikan Uji Senior High School, Kyoto, Japan. Congratulations. Next, Punahou School, Honolulu, Hawaii. Congratulations. Next, Harker School, San Jose, California. Next, Kansai Soka Senior High School, Osaka, Japan. Next, Gymnasia number 41, Novorossiysk, Russia. Okay, next, Hiroshima Jogakuin Senior High School. Sorry. Hiroshima Jogakuin Senior High School, Hiroshima, Japan. Congratulations. Okay, so last but not least, John Rosemary Hall, Connecticut. So thank you so much for everybody, and thank you so much Dr. Perry and Ms. Robin and Consul General Mr. Yamada. Thank you so much for your joining this one conference. Thank you so much. And thank you Dr. Pora and everybody. And I know I have to thank everybody, but I will save it later. And do we have a lunch already? Okay. So perhaps what I would like to suggest is, it was quite a long morning. I believe everybody is now getting hungry. So what we would like to do is, maybe we could do the, how would you like to do that? Can we do the book signing and lunch all together? Maybe someone is waiting. While you are waiting, you can, eat and go to get his autograph. Okay? So book signing will be held right outside of this hall. There's a table, and